the good feels so good when you navigate to a point that you want, because it's often the hard part to get there. And I think that's true of life. If everything was perfect all the time and super easy, then you might not enjoy those highs as much.
Helping CEOs and business leaders discover the energy to perform exceptional brilliance and positively impact the lives of those around them. Be inspired by world leaders and next-level gurus. This is the Active CEO podcast, where the ordinary don't belong. And now your hosts, Craig Johns and Ben Gathercole.
On this episode of the Active CEO podcast, we speak with a young, thriving entrepreneur who has disrupted the legal landscape of Australia, is scaling at a rapid rate, and knows the importance of his team having the energy to perform. This adventurous Canberra lawyer founded the Proximity legal practice in 2011 with James Dunn, following a successful career at law firms Phillips Fox and DLA Piper. Proximity is an award-winning law firm with a difference, providing legal, procurement, and commercial and governance and assurance solutions through innovative advisory practices. He has a bachelor degree in computer engineering and law from the University of Canberra, as well as a graduate diploma legal practice from the Australian National University. In his spare time, he is director of Early Bird Events, supports Men's Link, loves being in the outdoors, and recently competed in the Adventure Racing World Championships held in Reunion Island in Madagascar. Community is a huge part of his life and has been a great role model for his team in supporting and getting involved in the Proximity Canberra Triathlon Festival, which is the most accessible triathlon for the corporate, government and Canberra community. We're looking forward to going on one big adventure as we welcome you to our very special guest, Sean King. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Craig. It's probably the best intro I've ever had. So.
Would you like to leave it at that then?
Yeah, that's right. We can stop now.
We'll move on. Well, it's amazing. That introduction just tells us a little bit about yourself. But I guess I'd like to just jump in and get you to tell us a little bit about your background growing up in Victoria and sort of how that led to where you are now.
Yeah, so I grew up, my father was in the military, so I spent a chunk of time in Victoria, but got to live in all sorts of places around Australia. And that was great actually. We lived in lots of rural places, inner city, and got to see lots of the country growing up. It was meant that you sort of saw lots of different environments, went to many different schools, and but I had a fairly traditional upbringing, I guess. Like a lot of Australians in a sort of very privileged country, and but quite a traditional upbringing. Got to spend lots of sort of time out farming, but then sporting wise, playing tennis and Aussie rules football, and from a fairly traditional upbringing.
A lot of the leaders that we speak to, like Kate Palmer from the Sports Commission, or now Sport Australia, and some of those people talk about their upbringing through community sport and learning from their parents and the community sporting organisations about how they want to sort of continue forward. Would be fair to say that's what you learned from?
Yeah, that's right. I think you can take a lot out of sports, and for me, I think one of the kind of great things about moving around was you did lots of different sports. So Victoria, Aussie rules dominated, but in other parts of the country it was different sports. And I think that's why I've sort of loved adventure racing later in life, is because it is such a mix of different things. So it probably means that you're never going to be the pinnacle athlete in one area, because that takes a sort of real dedication from a young age and focused on a particular sport. That hasn't been my background. It's been trying lots of different things and being reasonable at a broad range of things rather than being sort of great at any one sport.
So you chose to move to Canberra to study computer engineering and law. What attracted you to law? Was that something you grew up aspiring to?
No, it's not actually. It's a funny story, but engineering was something I'd been interested in. My father was an engineer, and so I'd seen that and I had a real interest in that, and I liked the kind of combination of the maths and the physics with producing something tangible at the end. So completely different to law. But through a sort of series of events, the university was starting up a course that was combined with law, and it seemed like a good way to go from technical engineering into management sort of later in my career, which I always had a real interest in. And so I did sort of law as just an add-on adjunct thing, really. And then once I was going through my studies, I got an opportunity to work with a law firm, and it was just a sort of basic income job while I was at university. And when I graduated, went on a sort of trip around the world, like a lot of people do, to have their sort of post-university break. And I was over at the sort of tail end of that big skiing family, so I was skiing in Canada, and I got this call to say, why don't you just do 1 year in law? You won't. You'll regret it if you don't sort of use that legal degree, get admitted, and sort of do that for a year, then go off and do your engineering thing. And I had a job opportunity with an engineering firm. I thought, well, that's probably a good idea. I'll defer that for a year, do the law for a year, and got into it and just really enjoyed it, and so never sort of left the course.
So what did the engineer firm say?
Yeah, I mean they were fine with it. I think at some point during that year, I called them and said that I've got further opportunities here, and I'm going to stick with this for a while longer. And I think that was it was a good way to start your career in some ways, because you didn't have any sort of expectations. There wasn't like, I've always invested in trying to get to this sort of place. I didn't have a sort of view about what firms I'd be working at or what type of work I'd be doing. It just because it came from left field, and therefore there was no sort of real pressure. It was just, let's see where this goes for a period, and it's nice to have that sort of release that if something's not working out, well, I can go back to what I'd originally planned to do. And I think that's try and talk to our graduates about sort of being open-minded about where your career takes you as well. It's good to have some sort of broad plan, but then to be open to sort of go with the flow, and if something steers you in a different direction, then be open-minded about it.
So obviously, that first year you're very open-minded. So what was it like starting out in law, and were there some big lessons you learned in that first year?
Yeah, I learned a huge amount. I mean, it's a big transition from the sort of academic practices of any sort of profession at university to doing it in a professional sense, and a lot of it isn't the technical piece, but how you relate to people, both within your organisation, but also dealing with clients, and how you turn something that's going to be not just a legal piece of advice, but something that's meaningful and useful and helps people with trying to solve their problems or whatever their issue is that they're coming to you with. So that was the first couple of years, was really about that, learning a whole bunch of, not the technical side, which have a decent grounding in, but all the rest that goes into being successful in business.
So on TV, we see the dramatised version of law, in shows such as Law and Order and The Good Wife. Is it really like that, or is it quite different in the real world?
Certainly the law I do, and that most of the work that Proximity does, is very different to that. We're dealing with government and large corporations, and so it's most of those dramas tend to be sort of centred around family law and criminal law. That's a different practice to us, and I think sometimes it's funny. You go to family Christmases and the like, and people expect that's what you're doing each day, and it's very different for us. It's much more a sort of business transactional firm that we have.
Yeah, so maybe could you expand on the Proximity story and how it started with yourself and business partner James Dunn, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
How it sort of panned out?
Yeah, so having worked at the kind of couple of big international firms was a great experience, but something that fairly early on I decided I didn't want to do for the rest of my life. And there was a couple of drivers for that. The first was, as much as I found the law interesting, you realise that the legal piece in these transactions was just a slice of what made the whole project kind of successful, and so had a real interest in sort of broadening into other commercial advisory aspects, and at the time that wasn't really a done thing. A lot of the sort of legal firms were very focused on their legal work, and they'd been successful doing that for 150 years, so why not? But we had the idea of having a sort of broader service offering that was a combination of the legal advice, but also commercial, financial, the financial aspects, the governance work, and so because that didn't exist, we had to create it. And there was also been some sort of well-documented challenges in the legal industries around the expectations that some of those firms have on their staff, and some pretty significant mental health challenges that result from the work pressure and the long hours. And I was never the sort of person who defined myself completely by my career. I had other interests, sport and family and travel interests, and so I didn't want to find myself in 20 years looking back saying I've carved out this great legal career, but it's at the expense of everything else that interests me. So, the sort of logical conclusion to all of that was a decision to start Proximity, and so that was back in sort of end of 2011, and I was planning, or initial thought was I'd be happy to sort of go it alone, but I knew it would be easier having someone else to sort of share that journey with. And so I spoke to James Dunn, who I'd worked with a lot. We worked at a couple of those firms together, and we just had a very similar sort of worldview, I guess. And we aligned in a lot of the ways that we wanted to do things in business, and he was keen. So we've been sort of going since then as sort of co-CEOs, which is something that I've really enjoyed, having that support.
So tell us about this co-CEO role. How do you guys make that work? Because we've heard a few times on our Active
Michael
CEO
Seawoods
podcast.
And Skybus.
Yep, some of those guys have but there's some firms that are very traditional.
Yeah, so it works for us in the sense that, well, a couple of ways. The main one is that when we started, we didn't define roles. So we didn't say, okay, my role is this side of the business and I'm going to do operations and you're going to be largely responsible for people and clients. In those first few years, we were both just essentially doing everything. And so it was, and what you kind of, over the evolution of that period of time, you start to work out where your strengths are. Someone might be stronger in a certain area, and so your role naturally builds around that. So now we have a degree of separation in terms of things that we manage in the business, but it's very sort of open, I guess. And
so fair to say organic type growth?
Yeah, exactly. Both in terms of the way those roles have grown for us, but also in terms of the business itself. I mean, we didn't go in with a sort of fully fledged plan to go from where we were then to where we are now. And a lot of that is going back to that sort of being open to opportunities and sort of exploring things when they come up. Yeah, you've got to have a rigour in the way you do that, because as a fast-growing business, it's easy to be attracted to every shiny new thing, but you've got to be strategic about what you're going to pursue. But I think being that general open-mindedness and always looking for other opportunities has probably been one of the sort of keys to our success.
So what's behind the name Proximity?
So when we started, so we were doing legal work in the federal government sector, which is a highly competitive market. It's a big market dominated by a handful of sort of national and global firms. And so we knew that if we said we do exactly the same as those firms, but we've got a different logo, that was not going to be successful. So we had to have a different story to tell, some sort of innovation to kick things off. And for us, that was based around having an on-site or an outposted model. So instead of our staff spending the majority of time in our office, cooped up in an office, producing things and then sort of sending it across to the clients and hoping that hit the mark, we were working out there every day with the clients, and we were part of their team. And so we'd be sitting with the other in-house lawyers that they have, but also with their finance team, the HR team. So we knew what was going on in those organisations. And so Proximity was the representation of the fact that we're close to you, and we're not just trying to do this from splendid isolation from our office.
What a great competitive advantage that you established yourself there. Been right in the thick of things, understanding what's going on. It must give you a massive advantage in the way that you're able to do your work and obviously build those relationships long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. The relationship part, obviously being there day in, day out, you really get to understand people in a different way and build those relationships, which is huge in business. And the other, I think the other real advantage of being you're kind of forced to innovate in a sense as a new entrant. So you have you have advantages and disadvantages, I guess, as a new entrant to a market, particularly an established market. And the disadvantage is, when Proximity started, we didn't have the brand of some of these firms that, literally been around hundreds of years with, across the world, maybe tens of thousands of staff. But that forces you to be nimble, to do things a bit differently. And as long as you play to that strength, and I think that's where a lot of the growth has come from. But yeah, it has been great to have, and we've evolved since then. We now do a lot more work from our office, but we still have that as a kind of core part of our business. And even when people aren't in that sort of on-site or outposted model, they're still used to being connected with the client and really thinking about what is the client's needs and drivers in this, and not doing what's the sort of ideal world sort of view, or what advice would I give in a vacuum. They're really thinking about what is this going to do for the client.
So you've, talking about growth there, it's been exponential in the last 18 months. You've grown from around 20 staff to 55 plus now. What has been your secret to success, I suppose, enabling that rapid growth and being able to scale so quickly?
Yeah, there's a few parts to that. I think one of the biggest ones is, in a lot of professional services businesses, the mantra is always client first. And it's absolutely important to get the client piece right. But we've taken more of a view, I guess, aligned to what would in sort of a global business be called the triple bottom line, which is, you don't want to think just about clients. You've got to get the combination of clients, staff and community right. And I think that's been a huge part for us, because really focusing on what's the environment for staff like. And because if you're thinking all your energy is going into the client piece and you've got a bad staff experience, then people won't stay, and the most talented people will either not join you or they'll walk out the door. And so we've had a real focus on getting the environment right for staff and being very flexible in terms of how and when people work, and making it a place where people were genuinely sort of passionate to come and work with Proximity. And I think that's been a huge part of it, particularly in a predominantly services-based business. The business is only as good as its people, and I'm really proud about the team we've assembled.
Well, so can you explain that or sell that to me? If I was a new staff member coming through the door, this sort of is turning the model around a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're really telling people how good it is to work here for these reasons.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of them, but the first one is just flexibility, which is very simple to say. It's actually very simple to offer, but it hasn't been the sort of traditionally available to a lot of people in the legal industry. So, in our at our workforce, if people want to work full-time standard role, then that's available to them at Proximity. But we've got huge numbers of people that might work part-time in terms of regular part-time 3 days a week, or they might work 5 days a week school hours, or lots of people who will work 3 months and then they might not work the 6 months, and then they'll come back and work part-time for a period, and then they'll say, I'm going to take another month off, and it's just about being completely accommodating for that. And so a lot of people who have joined us actually may well not be practicing law at all at the moment. They might be focusing on families or their sport, if it wasn't for the fact that they can accommodate both at Proximity. So that's a huge part. And then the other is recruiting people that are people who are going to invest in their colleagues and have great relationships with clients and colleagues. And that means actually having some people who would be great technical practitioners who haven't joined our business, because we're a much more sort of relationship-driven business that, so we've got to focus on a particular type of person, I guess.
So you don't require them to come out and adventure race with you before they start or anything?
No.
Oh, I can see the look in your eye. You're thinking about that one.
Yeah, I mean, we do actually have quite a bit of active participation in sport, but it's not something that it's certainly not a criteria, but we do like to have, Craig mentioned that we sponsor the triathlon in Canberra, and that's great to have our staff participate in, and it's a really achievable triathlon. It's not an Ironman or anything, and the participation rate amongst staff is huge. We have essentially nearly every staff member will get involved in that, and that might be essentially doing the 2 kilometre run as a walk. But if they're out there and part of it.
Well, it's about engagement, isn't it?
It's
really one of the terms that you want people to be engaged with what you're doing, and And then it probably leads us to the next question about getting involved with the sponsorship and the support, not only community, but triathlon. I know you're involved with Men's Link, a number of other organisations. So obviously you feel very proud about putting back into the community.
Yeah, and on a couple of fronts. I mean, I think we're incredibly fortunate. I've just got back, as Craig mentioned, from a trip to Madagascar, and you realise there how much of what we have. Some of it is smart business and the like. Investing in your career, but a lot of it is just pure luck. Born in the right country at the right time. And so I think with that mindset, you realise that you've got an obligation in many ways to give back to the community. And in law, that's probably particularly strong. There's a monopoly on providing legal services. Only lawyers are entitled to do it. But what comes with that is a responsibility to also ensure that services are available to people who might not be able to afford it. So we've had a really active pro bono program, and we have a huge number of our staff involved in that, and that's how we first started the relationship with Men's Link, was doing their legal work on a pro bono basis or a free non-fee basis. But through that we got to see just how much great stuff they were doing, supporting young men who needed that support. Maybe
we should talk up Men's Link here a little bit with Martin Fisk. Some of the work they do is just groundbreaking, really, and I would love to see those programs rolled out nationally. So for people who don't know about Men's Link, they do amazing work. They've got a couple of programs. They run a program in schools which is training both men and women around things like kind of expectations and how to manage tricky situations. They cover off on everything from mental health to ensuring that men are respectful of women, all sorts of things. And then the other part, which is sort of I guess their core, is buddying up young men who don't have a male role model in their life with someone who's willing to be that. And you hear from the boys who have often been in a really tough situation and turned their lives around, or from the mums who felt like they had a sort of teenage son who was a bit directionless and then had this mentor that really helped them set a different path in life, is amazing work. And you mentioned the CEO, Martin Fisk. He's a really sort of passionate and energetic guy, and he's done great things for that organisation. Unbelievable, isn't it, really? So proud that you're involved with those, and those guys can get out in the community too.
And it does. I mean, it also gives a sense of purpose for our staff. Aside from you do it for the community benefit reasons, but it actually makes smart business as well, because it gives people something to really believe in, and that's true of the work people are doing day to day as well. But it doesn't touch individual lives in quite the same way as something like supporting the Men's Link. We're now supporters of Farmer Geelong, which is also helping young women, and a number of other charities around the place, and that does give people something to really bond on, and helps helps the team to be sort of passionate, which is great.
So talking about that mental wellness, and then also the active wellness of the Proximity Canberra Triathlon Festival, which is obviously supporting the community and government and corporates getting involved. It's a pretty amazing event. We see a lot of people complete it for the first time, whether it be as an individual or, more importantly, as a team. There's even a combined Liberal, Labor, Greens party triathlon team in the 2019 event. Is there quite a bit of banter that goes on between the corporate and government departments?
Yeah, there is. I mean, that's a really fun thing about it, and that's the way the event should be. It's not in. There's a serious aspect of it for people who want to compete seriously. But there's also a real sense of sort of fun and collegiality, and I guess good-natured competition between organisations in the same industry, or
it's almost an icebreaker too, isn't it?
It is, and it really can be the sort of thing that it's early in the year, and it's amazing the number of people that, as you say, they come and do their first triathlon, but then you speak to them several months after and you find out, well, now they have taken up swimming, or they're doing some running, or they're just making sure they get out with their family to the park more. And that's the great thing about these kind of events, is sometimes it's just that catalyst to sort of reignite maybe something you did in your youth, or be trying something for the first time. And it's there's so much sort of scientific literature and around the importance of kind of being physically active, and how that leads to better performance at work, that it's great to sort of kick the year off that way.
So that's obviously a catalyst for a lot of people, but for you, you You got a taste of multisport and adventure racing when you came to Canberra in 2000, including doing the epic Sri Chinmoy triple try, which I'm sure you got a great story about. What lit the spark in you to become an adventure racer?
Yeah, so when I came to Canberra, I'd really done traditional sports as my background, and I was probably the one exception to that was I'd taken up in the sort of late years of high school snow skiing and snowboarding, and I was doing a bit of that, and so I was out at University of Canberra, and they have a sort of an outdoors club there, which is, and skiing was one of the aspects. And I said, perfect, meet some like-minded people. I was new to the town, and it just opened my eyes to a whole different world. And there was people who were into mountain biking and hiking and climbing and canyoning and all these sort of sports that I'd had no exposure to. So I did ski with them during the winter, but I was really excited in the summer to try all these new sports, and so I did that for several years with them, and because it was the combined engineering and law degree was 6 years, and I was there for quite a stint, and so by the end of it, I took on the role as president of that club, and it just gave me exposure to all those sports, and I loved the trying new things and being in the outdoors, and through that it really led into adventure racing. There's there was a sort of local series, and a few of us thought, let's take that on, and quite sort of really sort of fun, frivolous type races, and it just went from there.
Because Canberra is almost like a fringe festival for outside the normal sports. There's all sorts of things that go on here.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there's some pretty incredible athletes and people, but also just a really high participation rate of everyday folk, and that's one of the. I don't think I had any kind of great intention to stay in Canberra. Probably when I first arrived, it was a new place. I'd been so used to moving around, but it really grew on me, the access to the mountains. Literally sort of on the doorstep, and everything that you could kind of imagine. Great mountain biking, great kayaking. The snow was close, the beaches were close, and so that really has been a large part of what's kept me here.
Now, I've heard through those days that you're fantastic with the navigation. Has that improved as you've gone along?
yeah. I mean, that's so adventure racing, for people who don't know, it's a combination of the kind of core sports, of trail running, mountain biking, and kayaking, and then you might have a mix of other ones thrown in, roping and other things. But the sort of one of the fundamentals is you've got to navigate yourself around to these points, and so I had a reasonable kind of fitness in those early days, but no navigation skills. And you can run as fast as you like, but if you're running in the wrong direction, it's not particularly helpful.
Come back.
And that was us for a bunch of time, and again, because I hadn't come up through that really ingrained outdoor kind of environment. My navigation was pretty sort of scratchy in those early years, but that was the fun of it. Was just being out there and thinking, we could be completely lost.
So we're actually lucky to have you here.
Yeah, that's right. There were some times where it genuinely felt like that. Yeah.
You've gone some pretty incredible places. You've done God Zone, which is in the backcountry of New Zealand in the South Island. You've recently just raced at the Adventure Racing World Championships in Reunion Island in Madagascar, which is, I'm sure it's on a bucket list of many people just to go and visit the place. Is it just a great excuse for a holiday, or is there something that really draws you to go to those amazing parts and put yourself through some torture and pain and getting lost?
Yeah, it's great to get to see the world. Going to these places that you probably wouldn't find the excuse to go there otherwise. Or if you did, you certainly wouldn't have experienced it in the same way. And that's the thing about these long adventure races run over several days and nights, and so you might, if you went to Reunion Island, climb the highest mountain there, but for us, we were there at 2 a.m, 3 days into a race, and so you just see it in a completely different way. Having said that, it does not feel like a holiday because it's one of these. It's kind of a bittersweet experience, I think, adventure racing, and the good feels so good when you navigate to a point that you want, because it's often the hard part to get there, and I think that's true of life. If everything was perfect all the time and super easy, then you might not enjoy those highs as much. So adventure racing, the difficulties almost in getting to some of those spots is what sort of amplitudes amplifies the highs.
So it's fair to say that you're comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, you have to. I think you have to be for adventure racing. You have to be happy that at times it's just going to be tough, and know that you kind of will get past that. But the other great thing is it's a team sport. So there's 4 of you in a team, and I don't think you would be able to kind of complete those same kind of adventures as an individual. Partly the physical aspects of it, but most significantly just when you feel mentally cooked, there's someone there and you can lean on in your team to say, we've just got to get through this. And physically, I mean, I really experienced that this last race. Had one of my toughest sort of race moments when I felt completely nauseous, exhausted, barely able to move, and you had teammates there who would say, let me carry that gear, we'll kind of keep an eye on you for these next couple of hours, where you kind of hope that you sort of bounce back on the other side.
So let's give a plug to these 3 teammates here. Who did you race with this year?
Yeah, so I raced with Rowan Killam, who I've raced with for many, many years in lots of races. Daniel Holland, and a long-term sort of friend of mine from back at the Outdoors Club days at university, and Shelley Bambrook, who, that was an interesting experience because Shelley's sort of only new to our team, only raced with her for the first time within the last 12 months, so a new person. But yeah, they were great teammates, and a good adventure to sort of be able to share with people. I don't think it'd be quite the same if you were doing it by yourself.
So the other day we were talking with Natalia Cohen, who's going to be on a podcast in the future, and they rode from San Francisco to Cairns, right? So 9 months on the ocean, 4 people rowing a boat.
Yeah.
And 6 hours into day one, they had one of their teammates seeing a pirate ship go past and having hallucinations, and they kind of had a motto that if 2 people don't see it, it didn't happen, right? So were there stages where you've got to cope with that hallucination going on, the paranoia? I mean, you're out in this really dense bush and places you'd never been, and you're trying to navigate in the middle of the dark, and you're sleep deprived, and you're probably onto day 3 or 4 of these events. How do you cope in those times?
Yeah, the hallucinations can definitely be part of it, and anyone who's done adventure racing for a while has seen some pretty strange stuff. And it's amazing though, the rhythms. Different people are at different rhythms, so the coping really is a lot again about reliance on other team members. And another part is, I guess, that just sort of finding new limits for yourself. I think that pushes you on at various times when you think about you want to be done, but you think, oh well, I'm just going to look at how do I complete this leg, and when I finish this leg, then I'll think about the next stage. And so a lot of it is just breaking things down to what's immediately in front of you, get through that, and then onto the next section.
I do that with work. How do I get to morning tea?
Yeah.
How do I get to lunch?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true, and I think it's in business, maybe not so much getting through the day, but how are you going to sort of deliver on a sort of 3-year business plan or something? Some of that is looking at the whole thing and then saying, okay, well, what have I got to do right in this moment, and not being distracted by something that's years in front of you. And adventure racing is the same. You need to have a plan about how you're going to get through the entire course, because if you treat it like it was only one leg and went too hard, then you're not going to survive the rest. So in pacing and things relies on that. But at certain points, you've just got to say, well, what have I got to do right now? Because if you think of the whole thing, it's just a bit overwhelming.
So we're kind of getting a bit of an understanding of how you cope in these situations when you're in a team environment out of venture racing. Can you explain to us your leadership style and how, what you're learning from the other activities you do, both in family life, your other business venture, and maybe from the adventure racing as well, how that kind of helps complement the way you lead your organisation?
Yeah. I don't know if sort of have a name for the style. In some ways, I focus a lot on leadership that gets a lot of people involved in the decision making. We're definitely not a sort of authoritarian type leadership. Certain businesses function well that way, but that's not us. I mean, we spend a lot of time focusing on what is it, and getting everyone involved and saying what is it that we want to do as a collective group, as a business. And I think that really works for us, and that probably got a lot of does have a lot of parallels to adventure racing, because ultimately, this recent race, I was the captain of our team, but when you're out in the middle of the bush, you can't tell people, okay, we're going to run 10% harder, and they'll listen to you just because you've told them that. It's really about having people want to be part of that, and the team all feeling like they're going towards some sort of collective goal, or they're sharing a collective ambition, and that's largely the way we run Proximity as well. So the going back to sort of the more traditional environment we're in, essentially you have usually a group of partners or directors, whatever it might be, who they set the tone or they set the the complete agenda and strategy for the organisation. For us, instead of having a partnership forum or something, we have a group, an internal strategy group, which is comprised from people who have just joined us, who might still be final year students, through all the various levels, from both people doing professional service delivery through to people working in the marketing teams and the like, all sort of throwing around ideas and having a role in setting the strategy for the business. And I think that's been hugely valuable for us. And you think, now that we do that, it seems obvious, but you still look at a lot of organisations, it might largely be a small number of typically white older men making decisions for a business, and you're clearly going to miss things there because you're not thinking about, well, what is the experience like for young folk and what do they want? What's the experience like for people with different backgrounds? And so we found that real having a kind of collective decision making works for us. And then there still is the need at times to make hard decisions as a leader, and so you've got to know when at certain times you've got to say, we've heard all of that, but this is the direction we're going to take, and then it becomes hugely about communication. This is the reason why we're taking this path, and others being able to really see that. And I think communication's massive. That's a big part of leading is bring others on the understanding the goal and bring them towards it. And then I think you can't get away with just saying. You've got to really lead by example and do. And I think most people in leadership roles would say that you've really got to sort of set the tone and live what you expect others to do.
So do you have any rituals or habits that you do each day to ensure that you're the best version of yourself and bring your A game to your team at work?
I actually don't. I'm not a ritual sort of driven person. And again, I think that's probably shows why I like things like adventure racing. Everything's coming from left field, and being in a sort of a new emerging business with trying to have bring innovations to the market is like that as well. Things just change every day, and so that really suits me. And I know at various times I've trained with triathlon squads rather than sort of with my adventure racing team, and that's much more methodical, I guess. You have a much more mapped out plan around what sessions you're going to do and periodisation and the like. Whereas for me, the randomness almost generates that. So I have times when it just happens to be that I'm super busy at work, so that's a rest period for me. And then I have times when I'm leading into events, I'll make sure that I'm training lots, and that's my downtime from work. And so I kind of just embrace the kind of chaos of that system, and I've got a couple of young children at the moment as well, so that the fact of all those different things happening in life, and on top of that we manage a farm, so I just kind of embrace that, which means I have very few routines and I'm happy that way. And it wouldn't suit everyone, but for me that's what I like.
So we all know smart people have great answers, but the best people have great questions. So when was the last time you did something for the first time?
Oh, that's a good question. I can think of an answer which is probably slightly off what you said. Rather than being the last time I did something for the first time, this afternoon I'll be doing something for the first time. So it's a future one, but in sort of only a handful of hours from now, I've got a horse riding lesson where I'm going to go jumping for the first time, and my wife has got quite into horse riding over the last couple of years, and she said, I've supported you through so many sports. We adventure raced a lot together, and I've done a lot of whitewater kayaking that she always said, I'm terrified of kayaking, and I got dragged on all these all these epic adventures, and so we, now you've got to have a crack at my sport. So I'm hooked up to do a horse jumping lesson this afternoon, which will be for the first time for me.
We might call you tomorrow morning and see how
it went with that. Yeah, that's right.
Mate, what is one question that you would love to solve?
Question I'd love to solve. Look, I think a huge challenge in Australia is how we do better by our Indigenous population, and I've had the opportunity through a few volunteering experiences to go out to Central Australia and see how a lot of the Indigenous communities live out there, and we've still got so much more we could and should be doing. but having spent a bit of time thinking about this, and a lot of people much more involved it than I am, with lots of goodwill, you know, and in, you know, investments of money and the like, we still haven't been able to kind of turn that around as well as we should. You know, there's still huge gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous health and literacy and all sorts of measures. And I think if I could have the answers to some of those questions about how we improve the situation for Indigenous Australians, I'd love to know that.
I think it's fair to say that we all feel the same, actually.
Yeah,
It'd be amazing to solve that one.
It's a huge issue, but really complex. You know, the overlay of you know, geography and different cultural aspects and
history.
Yeah, it's a really tough one. But if we could get some of the answers, we'd all be better for it.
Yeah.
And who has made the greatest impact on your career, and why?
Well, probably as a single individual, had the greatest impact is my wife, Kim, and that's because I probably never imagined myself starting a business. And when we were a few years out of university, she'd worked for a global hotel chain in marketing, and then she was doing work for Care International in their marketing team, one of the NGOs, and decided she wanted to start her own business. And seeing someone do it made it seem like a realistic thing to do. But I think without having that, I don't know if I would have been the person to say, oh, that's a viable alternative. And then it also made starting a business much easier. You know, rather than having to go out day one and lease office premises, you know, we could piggyback on a lot of the work they've done. Yeah, leech off Kim. And so I feel really, you know, that was a huge turning point when she decided to start a business, and I could see, oh, that's an option. Because I think for a lot of people, you know, they can have the ideas, and but you don't necessarily sort of see that as a possibility, and or if you do, it sort of seems too hard to achieve. So seeing someone else start a business was massive for me, and so yeah, I'd name Kim as the kind of the biggest sort of influence in my career to where it is, even though a completely different industry.
And what is Kim's business?
So Kim started Early Bird Marketing Events, and Craig in the intro gave me far too much credit of my role in that. So I am a director of the business, but very hands off because Kim really runs that. And yeah, they do events management in Canberra for a lot of mix of sporting events, but also government conferences and the like. And yeah, it's been a great little business that suits our family situation really well. Gives Kim a lot of flexibility around looking after our two boys, and yeah, and it's quite a different business than Proximity. And Kim's not sort of looking to grow it quickly, but it's still great to have someone else that you can bounce ideas off and say, well, you know, how are you treating this at the moment, or how are you tackling that, and then pick up the good bits and roll it into our business.
So Sean, it's been fantastic and a pleasure speaking with you today. Really enjoyable listening to the way you approach your leadership. You know, like I felt like today that I was on an adventure with you, but I felt very calm at the same time, that you had everything under control, apart from when you're navigating sometimes, but felt pretty under control. And, you know, really enjoyed the fact of you took that step to start your own business and do something really different and think about the story. I think a lot of people go into business and they don't think about how they can be have an advantage over someone else, or what can there be the unique selling point. So, you know, full credit for the way that you've done that. I also like the way that you have gained a lot out of what your wife did in taking that first step with the entrepreneurship. The co-CEO thing is quite fascinating. It's the second co-CEO we've spoken to, and we're actually going to go back and probably interview those two co-CEOs together next time, because there's some really big insights, I think, into the way that you can co-lead and the diversity that provides. And it's not just one person's opinion, it's a bit more of a collective at that, you know, major decision-making process. And we can really feel the sense of your community, you know, being involved with the likes of Men's League, setting up the triathlon event where you're bringing corporate, community and government all together, which is a fantastic idea, and how that helps support the growth and development of your team members as well, and as a team building and feeling better about themselves and being able to feel like they're achieving something not only in work but in the community and for themselves as well. So thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and we look forward to seeing how Proximity progresses in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, Ben. It's been great, and it's nice to actually get these questions and have a chance to reflect on them yourself and think about the answers to these. So yeah, appreciate it. It's been a great experience and great podcast.
And so by the time we go out, you would have had Christmas. So we wish you a very Merry Christmas, and it will be just launching in the new year. So we wish you, as you said, a great 2019.
Perfect. And to you.
Today's Active CEO Wellness tip is talking about being the one, developing a positive frame of mind about your exercise, your day ahead, and what's important to you.
Yeah, being able to align your exercise efforts with things that are both positive and reassuring is so powerful. If you try and align it with negativity, like, oh, I have to go for a run today, or I have to go to the gym, you're not going to, one, enjoy it, two, you're going to struggle through that, and you're not going to feel so great afterwards. So, being one with yourself and drawing that energy and going in there with a positive frame of mind.
And we've all been subject to that before, where you do wake up and say, oh my God, how can I face this? Why do I need to go for a run? Or you just add the stress by being negative. So to make the choice of how you view it is a really important skill to have.
And being able to surround yourself with people that enjoy exercising as a group and you enjoy being around, and that everyone bounces off each other and it provides a really positive mood. And it's something that you can really objectively measure the results from too. If you feel great being around and you're having a good laugh, then you're going to see the energy come out. You're going to push each other a little bit more, and at the end of the day, you feel so much more accomplishment.
Absolutely, and also think about it this way. You might lift the other people in your group or in your sphere or in your household, and that's a really important thing to do also.
Been a great interview today with Sean King at the Proximity offices. What a quiet office.
Yeah, it was amazing, but I can certainly tell you that everyone's happy and works away, busy beavers there, and it was really enjoyable to be part of their environment.
So co-CEOs with his good friend James Dunn, and we spoke about that a little bit. It's a unique experience. It's what we saw with Michael Seawards and Adam at Skybus.
Yeah, yep. Obviously works very well for him, and as you said during the interview, it'd be really great sometime to actually interview both the boys together and sort of find out the dynamics and how it works. That'd be really cool to do too.
Yeah, it is very unique because he started off, they didn't actually put a lot of time into figuring out what the roles were. It became organic, and I suppose it's part of his life. Like he started off as an engineer and had the opportunity to be an engineer and decided to defer that for a very long time now and become a lawyer.
I think what I saw, Craig, certainly on that co-CEO, was just the open mindset. So really willing just to be part of the journey together, and I think that probably pays dividends for them, and that's probably why they didn't need the really clearly defined roles. They're quite happy to figure it out as they go along.
And I think it's important, right? You got to like the people you're around, and they established a really good environment there where they get people involved in an active, healthy lifestyle. And it's just an enjoyable one where people get to make some of those decisions together. And they talks about even those that are still in university. They come on as paralegals, or there might be interns in the organisation, but that should become part of the strategic decision-making teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And he talked about learning that in his early careers when he worked at other legal firms, not being part of that decision-making process. And you can now see that that's really paid dividends for him by bringing those people in and making them part. It's a collective, so to speak.
So he's navigating a really good path for himself, and it's quite funny because we talked about navigating as part of adventure racing, and he struggled with that at the beginning.
Yep.
Some great experiences there when you're under pressure, you're in the moment where you're sleep deprived, you've got that paranoia setting in, hallucinations come in sometimes, and we spoke about going to these amazing places, but as he said, you might be at the top of a mountain, but it might be 2 a.m. and you can't see anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real good lesson in the whole concept of making critical decisions under massive amount of stress or tiredness. Everybody knows that happens in business. Are you making the right decisions? And I guess the adventure racing is sort of magnifying it, so to speak. It happens in three or 4 days.
Got to be comfortable in that uncomfortable environment, which is all about business, especially if you're wanting to constantly evolve and change and innovate in what you're doing. And they've done a fantastic job in changing the legal model here, especially in Australia, where rather than sitting in their own office
and writing reports and sending them off. They're actually getting in,
People.
down and dirty, inside the organisation and learning with everyone, not just about the legal aspects, but we talked about the communication, the HR, and more of the strategy aspects as well.
Yeah, obviously a very successful model, and they're I guess, showing that can be done differently.
And different they were. So this is the Active CEO podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.
Join the Active CEO movement by visiting www.nrg2perform.com. That's NRG2perform.com. Share this podcast on LinkedIn and be sure to tag in NRG to Perform. Leave a review on iTunes. Drop us a line with your feedback and questions, and connect with us on the NRG to Perform Facebook and Instagram pages. Be sure to check out the next Active CEO podcast, where the ordinary don't belong.